Rain hammered the black SUV as three masked men dragged Lila Hart across the parking garage, her heels scraping concrete, her scream cut short by a gloved hand. She was the most powerful heiress in the country, and in 90 seconds she would be gone forever. Then a shadow stepped out from behind the pillar. The quiet security guard she passed every morning without a glance. The man whose name she had never bothered to learn, and what happened next would unravel every secret her dead father had buried for 18 years. If you stay with me until the very end of this story, do me one small favor. Hit that like button, and drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments, so I can see just how far this story has traveled tonight. Now let's begin. The rain had been falling since 4 in the afternoon. By 9 o'clock it was the kind of rain that didn't fall so much as collapse. Sheets of it slapping against the glass towers of downtown Ashford, rolling down Hartwell Defense Systems' 52 stories and pooling in the loading bays where trucks usually idled. Most of the building had emptied out hours ago. Friday night. Weather advisory? Even the cafeteria staff had gone home early. Ethan Cole stood inside the south vestibule, hands in the pockets of a navy uniform jacket that was a size too big in the shoulders, and watched the water come down. He was 30 years old and looked about what a 30-year-old security officer making $42,000 a year was supposed to look like. Dark hair cut short, but not military short. A 3-day beard he kept meaning to shave. A face that had once been handsome in a sharp way and was now softer around the edges, the way faces get when a man stops caring whether people look at him. He was 6 feet even and built like somebody who used to lift heavy things for a living and had, at some point, decided to stop. There was a coffee going cold on the console behind him, a paperback Western with the cover bent back, and taped to the inside of his locker, which he kept padlocked even though nobody in the building had ever tried to open it, a school photograph of a 6-year-old girl with 2 missing front teeth and her father's serious brown eyes. Her name was Maya. She was the only reason Ethan Cole got out of bed in the morning, and the only reason he hadn't put a bullet in his head 4 years ago. The radio on his hip crackled. "South vestibule, this is Central. Ms. Hart's car is on the way down. ETA 2 minutes. Ethan keyed the mic. "Copy." He didn't move, he just watched the rain. Lila Hart, 25 years old, 3 years out of business school, and already the youngest CEO in Hartwell's 70-year history. Her father, Vincent Hart, had died of a heart attack at his desk 18 months ago, and the board had expected his daughter to sell her shares and vanish to a beach in Greece. Instead, she'd walked into the boardroom in a black Armani suit the morning after the funeral and fired 3 vice presidents before lunch. Ethan had watched her that morning from his post in the lobby. She'd come through the revolving door with her hair still wet from the rain. It had been raining that day too, he remembered. And she hadn't looked at him. She hadn't looked at anybody. She'd walked across the marble floor with her heels clicking like a metronome, and her chin up and her eyes fixed on the elevators. And for half a second, Ethan had felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He had felt afraid for her. He didn't know why. He'd pushed the feeling down, the way he pushed most feelings down, and gone back to watching the door. That had been 18 months ago. Since then, he'd seen her maybe 400 times. She passed through the south vestibule most mornings because her private elevator ran from the executive garage, and the south vestibule was how you got to the executive garage. She never spoke to him. She never nodded. Once, about a year ago, she'd dropped a glove, black leather, lined with cashmere, and he'd picked it up and held it out to her, and she'd taken it without breaking stride and said, "Thank you," in a voice so flat and automatic that he knew she hadn't seen him at all. He hadn't minded, he preferred not to be seen. Being invisible was the whole point. The elevator chimed. Ethan pushed off the wall, straightened his jacket, and turned. She came out first, the way she always did. Black coat buttoned to the throat. Hair pulled back tight. A slim leather portfolio under one arm. Behind her, her 2 regular shadows. Briggs, the blonde one, who'd done 4 years with the Marshals before going private, and a new guy Ethan didn't recognize. Big guy. Shaved head. Something off about the way he held his shoulders. Ethan's eyes went to the new guy's hands. It was an old habit. You looked at the hands first. Hands told you everything. Whether a man had been trained, whether he was nervous, whether he was about to reach for something he shouldn't reach for. The new guy's right hand was tucked against his jacket, fingers curled in, thumb hooked over the buttons. Wrong. A man doesn't hold his hand like that unless he's reminding himself where something is. Ethan's chest went very still. Not tight. Still. Like a pond before a stone drops. "Ma'am," Briggs said, "cars pulled up outside. Weather's bad. Let's move quick." Lila nodded without looking at him. She was reading something on her phone, her thumb scrolling, her mouth a flat line. Ethan stepped aside to let them pass, and as Lila came even with him, her perfume caught in the air. Something dry and expensive, like cedar and cold water. And for just a fraction of a second, she glanced up. Her eyes met his. She blinked. And then, for reasons he would never be able to explain, she said, "Good night." 2 words. She'd never said 2 words to him in 18 months. Ethan's mouth went dry. "Good night, ma'am," he said. She looked at him 1 second longer than she had to. Then she was through the glass doors and out into the rain, Briggs popping an umbrella over her head, the new guy a half step behind with his right hand still tucked against his jacket. Ethan watched them cross the covered walkway to the waiting Escalade. He watched Briggs open the back door. He watched Lila duck her head to climb in. And he watched the new guy stop walking 3 feet from the vehicle and lift his left hand to his ear. The guy was wearing an earpiece. Neither Briggs nor Lila was wearing one. Ethan had been on this post long enough to know Hartwell's executive detail didn't use earpieces on short transports. They used the radio on the hip, same as everyone else. So who was this guy talking to? Ethan was already moving. He came through the glass doors at a walk that looked like a walk and was actually a run, rain hitting his face, and he got about 12 feet into the covered walkway before he saw the second SUV. It was parked behind the Escalade. Black, tinted, no plates, engine running. The back doors of the second SUV opened. 3 men got out. They were wearing black, and they were wearing balaclavas, and the one in front had a compact submachine gun that Ethan identified. In the quarter second he had to identify it as a Czech-made Scorpion, a weapon nobody in this country used except people who specifically didn't want to be traced. Briggs saw them a beat too late. He reached for his sidearm, and the man with the Scorpion shot him twice in the chest, soft coughs through the suppressor, and Briggs went down onto one knee and then onto his face. Lila screamed. The new guy, the shaved-headed one with the earpiece, grabbed Lila by the upper arm and yanked her back out of the Escalade, not to protect her, to deliver her. He'd been a plant. Somebody had bought him. Ethan filed that away and kept moving. The 3 men from the second SUV were closing on Lila. The plant was holding her by the arm. 4 men. One of them armed with a submachine gun, and at this range, Ethan had to assume the other 3 were armed too. Ethan Cole did not carry a firearm. Hartwell's South Vestibule security was classified as unarmed post. He had a baton, a radio, and pepper spray. He also had 8 years of things he had spent 4 years trying to forget. The closest hostile was the plant, because the plant was between Ethan and Lila. Ethan hit him from behind at a dead run, and he did not hit him the way a security guard hits somebody. He hit him the way a man hits somebody when he has decided that the man he is hitting does not need to stand up again. His right forearm came across the plant's throat. His left hand clamped the back of the plant's skull. He dropped his weight and rotated his hips, and there was a sound. Not loud, just a short, wet click, and the plant folded sideways and did not move. Lila stumbled free. Her eyes were the size of saucers. "Down," Ethan said. "Behind the pillar, now." She went. She didn't argue. Something in her face had clicked over from terror to something colder and more useful, and she went. The man with the Scorpion swung the muzzle toward Ethan. Ethan was already inside the arc. You don't run away from a submachine gun at 6 feet. You run at it. You get your hands on it before it gets its hands on you. He trapped the barrel against his ribs. He felt the heat of it, the shudder as it fired once, a round punching through his jacket and out into the rain. And he drove the heel of his right hand up into the man's nose. The nose broke. The head snapped back. The grip loosened. Ethan took the Scorpion. He pivoted and shot the man on the left twice, center mass, and the man on the right once, high in the throat, and they both went down into the wet asphalt and stayed down. The 4th man, the driver of the second SUV, was scrambling back toward the driver's door. Ethan shot out the man's knee. He wanted one alive. The man screamed and hit the pavement. It had taken, from the moment Ethan came through the glass doors, 11 seconds. The rain kept falling. Somebody in the lobby was shouting into a radio. An alarm started, somewhere in the building, a flat electronic bleeding. Ethan stood in the middle of it with a Czech submachine gun in his hands, and rain running down his face and a small, dark circle on the right side of his jacket where the round had gone through. And he was breathing slow and even, and his hands were not shaking. That was the part that scared him most. His hands weren't shaking. He'd promised Maya he would never be this man again. He turned his head and looked at the pillar. Lila Hart was crouched behind it, black coat soaked through, hair coming loose, one palm flat against the concrete. She was staring at him, and she wasn't staring at him the way people stared at their security guards. She was staring at him the way you stare at something you've just realized you've had completely, catastrophically wrong. The police took 90 minutes to clear the scene. Ethan gave his statement to a detective named Alvarez, who kept looking at the bodies and then looking at Ethan and then looking at the bodies again like he was trying to do math that wasn't adding up. 4 attackers, 1 unarmed security guard, 3 dead, 1 in custody with a shattered knee, Briggs alive but in surgery for a collapsed lung because his vest had caught both rounds but 1 rib had splintered inward. "You said you've got no combat training," Alvarez said for the 3rd time. "I said I'm not currently a combatant," Ethan said. "You're hearing what you want to hear. Son, you took out 4 armed men with a baton in your bare hands in about the time it takes me to order a cheeseburger." "I took the weapon off the first one," Ethan said. "After that, it was just shooting." "Just shooting?" Alvarez stared at him. "Am I under arrest?" "No." "Then I'd like to go see my daughter. She's with a sitter, and she's going to see this on the news." Alvarez let him go. He also, Ethan noticed, had somebody follow him out. The lobby was full of cops and paramedics and Hartwell's senior security people, all talking at once. Somebody had put a blanket over Lila's shoulders. She was sitting on one of the marble benches by the reception desk, very straight, the blanket slipping off one shoulder, a paper cup of coffee going cold in her hands. She looked up when Ethan walked past. "Mr. Cole," she said. It was the first time she had ever used his name. Ethan wasn't even sure how she knew it. He stopped. "Ma'am, come here, please." He came. Up close, in the fluorescent lobby light, she looked younger than she did in the papers. There was a fleck of something dark on her jaw. Blood, he realized, not hers. And her mascara had run in one thin track under her left eye. Her hands around the coffee cup were not quite steady. "Sit down," she said. "I'm all right standing." "Sit down, Ethan." He sat. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. She just looked at him, that same look she'd given him behind the pillar, the look of someone doing math that wasn't adding up. "You killed 3 men, she said finally. "Yes, ma'am. In about the time it takes to cross a street." "I was motivated." She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Are you going to tell me what you actually are?" "I'm a security guard, ma'am." "No, you're not." "Ma'am, with respect, I'm going home to my daughter. Whatever else you want to know, you can ask me on Monday." He stood up. He was almost to the revolving doors when she said behind him, very quietly, "Did my father know?" Ethan's hand stopped on the brass rail. He had not been expecting that question. He had been expecting a lot of questions, but not that one. He turned around. She was still sitting on the bench, still holding the coffee, still looking at him like he was a puzzle she was 2 pieces away from solving. "Ma'am," he said, "I don't know what you're asking." "Yes, you do," she said. He walked out into the rain without answering. Maya was asleep on the couch when he got home. The sitter, Mrs. Delgado from 4B, had fallen asleep too, a romance novel open on her chest. The television was on low, some cartoon, animals in hats. Ethan paid Mrs. Delgado, thanked her, walked her to the door, locked the 3 locks, and slid the chain. Then he stood in his own living room for about a minute with his hands hanging at his sides and just breathed. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, on the 4th floor of a brick building in a neighborhood that the real estate listings called emerging and everyone else called cheap. The walls were white because he hadn't painted them. The furniture was mostly from estate sales. The only thing in the living room that had cost more than $100 was the upright piano against the far wall, and he had bought that for Maya when she was 4 because her mother had played. Her mother had been named Sarah. She had died in a parking lot in Bethesda when Maya was 18 months old, which was a thing Ethan did not let himself think about. except on nights when he had no choice. Tonight was a night when he had no choice. He walked into the bathroom and closed the door and turned on the light. And he took off his jacket and his shirt and looked at himself in the mirror. The round that had punched through his jacket had grazed the outside of his right bicep. It wasn't bleeding anymore. It would be a pink line by morning. He'd had worse from a cat, but his face, in the mirror, was the face he had promised himself he would never see again. The face that had no expression. The face he used to have in the sandbox, on the ridge, in the long, airless nights in places whose names he couldn't say out loud. He put his hands on the sink and leaned on them and closed his eyes. "You had a choice," he said to himself quietly, out loud. "You had a choice, and you made it." He didn't believe it. He hadn't had a choice. The moment he'd seen the plant with the earpiece, the moment he'd seen the scorpion, the moment Lila Hart's eyes had gone wide, he had not been a security guard anymore. He had been something else, and that something else had come out of the box he kept it in with the speed and appetite of a thing that had been waiting. That was the part he couldn't tell Maya. That was the part he couldn't tell anyone. He splashed water on his face, put on a clean t-shirt, and went out to the living room. Maya didn't stir when he picked her up. She was 6, all angles and elbows, her hair a brown cloud against his shoulder. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and the peanut butter sandwich she'd had for dinner. He carried her to her bedroom and laid her on the pink sheets and pulled the quilt up to her chin. The quilt had been his mother's. His mother had died when he was 12. He hadn't thought about his mother in a long time. Maya's eyes opened a slit. "Daddy? I'm here, baby. Mrs. Delgado made fish sticks. Did you like them?" "They were okay. Too much lemon." "I'll tell her." "Don't," Maya said. "She'll feel bad." She yawned, enormous, and her eyes closed again. "Did you work late?" "A little late, yeah." "Is everything okay?" Ethan sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped. He pushed a piece of hair back from her forehead. "Everything's okay, sweetheart." "Promise?" He hesitated. "I promise," he said. He sat there until her breathing went slow and even again. Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead, and he stood up, and he went out to the kitchen and poured himself a finger of bourbon he didn't want, and sat at the table and waited for the shaking to start. It didn't come. That was the worst part. Lila Hart didn't sleep that night. She sat in her apartment, the penthouse her father had left her, 60 floors above the city, all glass and steel and art that had been picked out by a consultant. And she drank a glass of white wine that she didn't taste, and she watched the rain on the windows, and she thought about the man who had saved her life. She was not a sentimental woman. Vincent Hart had not raised a sentimental woman. He had raised a woman who understood balance sheets and governance structures and the precise weight of a handshake. He had raised a woman who, when he died, had been able to walk into a boardroom full of 60-year-old men and stare them down without blinking. Sentiment was for people who could afford it. Lila Hart could not afford it, but she could not stop seeing Ethan Cole's face. Not the way it had looked when he'd said goodnight to her in the vestibule. Tired, ordinary, the face of a man who probably made $14 an hour and was looking forward to going home. The other face. The one she had seen for half a second when he stood in the rain with a submachine gun and 3 dead men at his feet. That face had not been tired. That face had been calm in a way that had frightened her more than the men who had grabbed her. Calm like weather, calm like something that had already happened. She set the wine glass down. She went into her office, the small one off the bedroom, not the one for show, and she sat down at her desk and she opened her laptop. She logged into Hartwell's employee database using her father's old executive credentials, which she had never stopped using because nobody had ever told her she couldn't. She typed, Cole, Ethan. A personnel file came up, hired 18 months ago. Security officer, grade 3. Salary, $42,800. Prior employment, 2 years at a commercial security firm called Meridian Protective Services. Before that, a 4-year gap. Before the gap, honorable discharge, United States Army, rank of sergeant. That was it. 4 lines. Lila frowned. The file was clean. Too clean. There was no listed unit, no listed deployment record, no citations, no medical history. She had looked at dozens of employee files in her time at Hartwell, and every single one of them had more in it than this. She tried a different search. Ethan Cole. Department of Defense records. Access denied. She tried her father's private credentials, the ones he had used to pull her out of her kidnapping in 2008, the ones he had used to find her mother when her mother had gone missing in 2012, the ones he had used for 100 things he had never explained to her before he died. Access denied. Her mouth went dry. There were exactly 3 kinds of records in the world that her father's credentials had never failed to open. Records belonging to Hartwell Defense Systems, records belonging to the Hart family, and records belonging to assets her father had personally sponsored out of classified government programs. Ethan Cole's records were in the 3rd category, which meant her father had known about him, which meant her father had put him here, which meant Lila sat very still for a long moment, her hands flat on the desk, her reflection ghosting back at her from the dark window behind the laptop, which meant that a 30-year-old security guard who made $42,000 a year and said, "Good night, ma'am," in the evenings, and took down 4 armed men in 11 seconds, had not been assigned to the south vestibule by accident. He had been put there, by her father, to watch her. She got up and walked to the window, and she pressed her palm against the cold glass, and she looked out at the lights of the city, and for the first time since her father had died, Lila Hart felt the very specific sensation of discovering that a man she had loved completely had been keeping a secret from her whole life. The rain was starting to stop. Somewhere out there, 60 floors below her and 4 miles across the river, Ethan Cole was sitting at a kitchen table with a glass of bourbon he wasn't drinking, and she didn't know it yet, but she would be standing in his living room before the week was out. She picked up her phone. She pulled up a number she had used exactly twice in her life, a number her father had given her on her 21st birthday and told her to call only if the sky was falling. The sky, she thought, was falling. She pressed the button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. A man's voice picked up, older, careful. "Miss Hart, I need you to tell me," Lila said, "everything my father knew about a man named Ethan Cole." There was a silence on the line, not the silence of a man searching his memory, the silence of a man who had been expecting this call for a long time, and who had hoped very much that it would not come. "Miss Hart," the man said finally, "are you in a secure location? I'm in my apartment." "That isn't what I asked." Lila's heart did a small, slow beat against her ribs. "Tell me where to meet you," she said. "Tomorrow, 11 a.m. The coffee shop on Barrow Street, the one with the green awning. Come alone. Don't bring a phone." "Who are you?" "I worked for your father for 31 years, the man said. "My name is Samuel Crane, and Miss Hart, before we talk, I need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that the man you met tonight is not a stranger to you." "What does that mean?" "It means," Samuel Crane said, "that when you were 7 years old, a man pulled you out of a burning car on the Capitol Beltway and then disappeared before anyone could get his name. Your father spent 11 years finding him." Lila couldn't speak. 11 o'clock, Samuel Crane said. "Don't be late." The line went dead. Lila stood at the window for a long time, holding the phone against her chest, and she did not know it, but 60 floors down and 4 miles across the river, Ethan Cole had finally gone to bed, and for the first time in 4 years he was dreaming about the burning car, and the little girl with 2 missing front teeth, and the promise he had made to a man who was now dead. The promise that whatever happened, whatever it cost him, he would never, ever let that little girl be taken. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city was very quiet. And 1,000 miles away, in a room without windows, 3 men were looking at a photograph of Ethan Cole's face on a screen, and one of them was saying in a voice without any expression at all, "Find out where he lives. Find out if he has family. Find out everything." The coffee shop on Barrow Street had a green awning that sagged in the middle from years of rain, and a bell over the door that didn't so much ring as rattle, and the kind of vinyl booths that had been reupholstered twice and were due for a third. Lila Hart had walked past it probably 400 times in her life. She had never been inside. She came through the door at 10:53 in the morning, 7 minutes early, wearing jeans and a gray wool coat she had bought in college and hadn't worn since, and her hair was down and she had no makeup on. And for the first time since her father's funeral, she looked like what she was, which was a 25-year-old woman who had not slept. The man at the corner booth lifted one hand, not a wave, an acknowledgement. Lila crossed the room. Samuel Crane was in his late 60s, maybe 70, with the kind of face that had been weathered by something other than weather. He was wearing a flannel shirt and a Carhartt jacket and a ball cap with no logo on it, and he had a cup of black coffee in front of him and a second one, already poured, waiting on the other side of the table. "Sit," he said. She sat. "I ordered you coffee. I didn't know what you took in it." "Black is fine." "Good. That's how I drink it." He pushed the cup across. "I'm going to tell you some things, Miss Hart, and some of them you're not going to want to hear. I'd appreciate it if you'd hold your questions until I'm done. We don't have a lot of time." "Why don't we have a lot of time?" He looked at her steadily. "Because by about 2 o'clock this afternoon, certain people inside your company are going to figure out that a certain file got pulled last night from a certain server, and when they do, they're going to start looking for the person who pulled it. That person is you, and when they find out it's you, they're going to do something about it. So I would like to be finished with this conversation and back in my truck by noon. Are we clear?" Lila's throat was dry. "We're clear." "All right." Samuel Crane folded his hands around his coffee. "On the evening of September 11th, 2008, when you were 7 years old, your mother picked you up from ballet at the studio on Kenwood Avenue. You remember that?" "Some of it." "She took the Beltway home. There was construction on the inner loop. A tractor-trailer driver had been awake for 19 hours and he drifted into your lane at 64 miles an hour. The trailer came across the median and clipped the front of your mother's Mercedes, and the car went into the guardrail, and it rolled twice, and it came to rest upside down in the grass off the shoulder with the engine on fire." "I know," Lila said. "You think you know." "There was a man in a black pickup truck 3 cars behind you. He pulled onto the shoulder. He kicked out the rear passenger window, and he cut your seatbelt with a knife, and he dragged you out by your left ankle approximately 30 seconds before the fuel line went. You had a broken collarbone and a concussion and second-degree burns on your right calf. Your mother was already gone. That man stayed with you on the grass until the first ambulance arrived, and then he walked back to his truck, and he drove away, and he did not give his name to anyone." "I know all that," Lila said quietly. "My father told me." "Your father told you a version of it." Samuel Crane took a slow sip of his coffee. "What your father did not tell you is that the man in the pickup truck was not a stranger who happened to be passing by. The man in the pickup truck had been driving behind your mother's car for 11 miles. He had been assigned to do so." Lila set her coffee down. "Assigned by whom?" "By your father." The bell over the door rattled. A woman with a stroller came in and ordered a latte. Samuel Crane waited until she was back out on the sidewalk before he spoke again. "Your father," he said, "had been receiving threats for about 6 months. Somebody had tried to take you once already. At the playground on Overlook, the spring before the accident. You wouldn't remember. You were 5. A woman grabbed you by the wrist, and your mother's friend grabbed you by the other wrist, and there was about 9 seconds of pulling, and then the woman ran off, and your mother's friend took you home. Your mother was told it was a misunderstanding. Your father was told the truth. He started putting people near you, quiet people you would never notice. The man in the pickup truck on the Beltway was one of those people. His name," Lila said. "I'm getting there." "What was his name?" "He was 20 years old," Samuel Crane said. "He was on a 90-day medical leave from the Army, and he was working private protection on the side because his mother was dying, and the bills were more than the base pay covered. He had been a kid out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and he had been in country for 6 weeks before he got shot through the shoulder and sent home to recover. When his mother died that November, he went back overseas, and he stayed over there, on and off, for the next 8 years. And the reason he was driving behind your mother's car in September of 2008 was because your father paid him $2,000 a week to do it, and because your father had decided, after meeting him exactly one time, that this was a person he could trust with your life." Lila's hands were wrapped around the coffee cup very hard. "His name," she said, "was Ethan. His name was Ethan Cole." For a moment she couldn't look at him. She looked at the window instead. The light coming through the glass was thin and gray, and there was a man across the street reading a newspaper on a bench, and 2 young women walking a small brown dog, and the city was going about its Saturday morning in a way that made no room at all for what she was being told. "He was 20, she said. "He was 20. He pulled me out of a burning car when he was 20 years old, and he walked away and he never said a word. And he came back 18 months ago as a security guard at my company. He came back about 8 months after he got out of the army. Your father found him in Oklahoma. He'd lost his wife, and he was working nights at a warehouse, and he was... Samuel Crane stopped. He was not in a good place, Miss Hart. Your father went out there himself. I drove him. We sat at a diner with Ethan Cole for about 3 hours, and your father offered him a job, and Ethan turned it down. Your father offered him a better job. He turned that down too. Your father finally said to him, and I was at the table, so I heard this. Your father said, "Son, my daughter is going to be in charge of that company in a few years, and there are people in that company who are going to want her dead. I cannot be there. I am asking you to be there." And he said yes. He did not say yes that night. He said no. He said he was done with that kind of work, and he said he had a baby daughter. And he said he couldn't promise anything to anybody anymore. We drove back to the airport. About 4 months later, your father got a letter in the mail. It was one line. It said, "If she ever needs me, I'll be there." Lila pressed her fingers against her eyes. That was 6 months before your father died, Samuel Crane said. He put Cole in the south vestibule on a Wednesday in April. He came home that night and he told me this was in the kitchen. He had made a sandwich. I remember the sandwich. It was turkey on rye. He told me, "Samuel, I can die now if I have to." 2 months later, he was on the floor of his office. Lila took her hand away from her face. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. She was just leaking a little at the corners the way people do when they've been holding something back for a long time. "Why didn't he tell me?" "Because he was your father," Samuel Crane said. "And because men of his generation and his background do not explain themselves. And because, I think, he believed that if you knew, you would either resent it or try to stop it, and he had decided he couldn't risk either one." "Who is trying to kill me, Samuel?" "I don't know. I know it's not the first attempt. There was a kidnapping scheme in Lisbon 2 years ago that got rolled up before you ever heard about it. There was a poisoning plan involving a caterer at your cousin's wedding in 2023 that I handled personally. Last night was the 3rd time, and it was the sloppiest, which worries me, because sloppy means somebody's getting impatient. Somebody on the board, or somebody the board is sold out to. Your father thought it was someone inside. He narrowed it down to 3 names before he died. I have those names. I will give them to you, but not here." "When?" "Tonight, 9 o'clock. You know the house in Willow Grove?" "My father's fishing cabin." "Yes. Be there at 9. Tell no one. Bring no phone." He paused. "And Miss Hart?" "Yes." "Do not go see Ethan Cole before tonight." "Why not?" "Because he will tell you to stay away from him. And because he will be right. And because I would like you to make that decision with a clear head and not in the middle of it." "Samuel." "Yes, Miss Hart." "Does he know? About the car? Does he know it was me?" Samuel Crane looked at her for a long moment. "He has known," he said, "since the day your father showed him your photograph, in a diner in Oklahoma, about 3 years ago." Lila sat very still. 9 o'clock, Samuel Crane said. He stood up. He put a $10 bill on the table for coffees that had cost $6, and he touched the brim of his cap at her, and he walked out of the coffee shop, and he did not look back. Lila sat there for another 20 minutes. Then she paid the tab, and she walked out onto Barrow Street, and she did not go home. She got in a cab, and she gave the cab driver an address in a neighborhood she had never been to, and 40 minutes later she was standing on the sidewalk outside a 4-story brick apartment building with an intercom panel missing 2 buttons, and she was looking up at the 4th floor, and she was telling herself with increasing unconvincingness that she was just going to see if he was all right. Ethan Cole's apartment had a dent in the doorframe where somebody, sometime, had hit it with a hammer. Lila stared at it for about 10 seconds before she knocked. She heard footsteps, then silence, then the sound of a chain sliding back. He opened the door in a white t-shirt and jeans and bare feet, and he had a dish towel over his shoulder, and for just a fraction of a second before the polite mask came down over his face, she saw him register who she was and do something she didn't expect. He looked tired, not surprised, not alarmed, just tired. "Ma'am," he said, "can I come in?" "You shouldn't." "I know I shouldn't." He stood in the doorway for another beat, then he stepped aside. The apartment was small and clean and almost aggressively ordinary. A brown couch, a television on a stand that didn't match the couch, A kitchen table with 2 chairs and a box of crayons open on one end of it. A little girl's coloring book lying face down with the pages bent. Against the far wall, there was an upright piano with the lid down, and on top of the piano, there was a framed photograph. And Lila did not look at the photograph because she was not, in that moment, equipped to look at it. The apartment smelled like grilled cheese. "I was making lunch," Ethan said. "Maya's at a friend's birthday party. Mrs. Delgado took her. She'll be back at 3. Whatever you're here for, I need you gone before 3. "All right." He closed the door. He did not lock it. He crossed to the kitchen and turned off the stove under a pan that had a half-cooked grilled cheese in it, and he slid the sandwich onto a plate, and he pushed the plate away without looking at it. Then he leaned against the counter with his arms folded, and he waited. Lila stood in the middle of the living room. She did not know where to start. "I met with Samuel Crane this morning," she said. Ethan closed his eyes for a second, just a second. Then he opened them again. "All right." "He told me about 2008. "All right." "He told me my father paid you." "He paid me. That's correct." "He told me you were 20. "I was 20. "He told me you walked away from the scene that night and never said a word to me or to my mother's family or to anyone." "I walked away." "Why?" Ethan looked at her for a long time. "Ma'am," he said, "I'd like to ask you to sit down. You've had a shock, and I'm not sure you've eaten, and I don't want to tell you any of this with you standing up in the middle of my living room." "I'm fine." "Please, ma'am, sit down." She sat on the brown couch. The cushions were soft in a way that suggested a little girl had spent a lot of time jumping on them. He brought her a glass of water from the kitchen. He did not sit himself. He pulled one of the kitchen chairs around so it faced the couch, and he straddled it backward, and he rested his forearms on the top of it, and he looked at the floor for a minute before he looked at her. "I walked away," he said, "because I was a scared 20-year-old kid who had just watched a woman burn to death in a car accident. He couldn't stop. And I was terrified that if I stayed on that grass one more minute, somebody in a uniform was going to ask me questions I couldn't answer, and I was going to end up on the front page of the Washington Post, and that was the last thing your father wanted. He had been very specific about it. He had paid me to be invisible. My job was to be invisible. And you were. For 18 years. And then he died," Ethan said. "And there was a problem. I wasn't supposed to be the last line of defense, ma'am. I was supposed to be backup. I was supposed to be the guy you never saw, the guy nothing ever reached. Your father had a whole apparatus around you, people I didn't even know about. When he died, some of that apparatus started falling apart. Not all at once. Slowly. People retiring, getting reassigned, quitting. Samuel tried to hold it together. He couldn't hold all of it. About a year ago, I started noticing gaps. Drivers I didn't know. Gate guards who didn't ask the right questions. Last night was the 3rd time I had to move. The 3rd time. The first time was about 4 months ago. A man followed you into a parking garage in Georgetown on a Thursday evening. He had a syringe. I was parked one level up. I got to him before he got to you, and I convinced him to go home." "Convinced him?" "I broke his hand, ma'am." "Oh." The second time was in February. A bellhop at the Waldorf had been paid to let somebody into your room at 3 in the morning. I found out about it around midnight. I had the bellhop relieved of duty. "How?" "I don't need to tell you how. The man who is coming to your room is in Rikers now on an unrelated charge, and he's going to stay there for a long time. Neither of those 2 things ever showed up on your desk, because they didn't need to. That was the arrangement. The idea was that you would never, ever have to know I existed." Lila looked at him. He was sitting on the kitchen chair backward with his forearms on the top of it, and the light through the window was falling across one side of his face, and he was 30 years old and he looked 40. And she saw, in that moment, with a clarity that hurt, exactly what her father had seen in him. He was a man who had been given a small, broken thing to protect, and he had done it for 18 years. And he had never once asked for credit, and he had never once considered stopping. And the reason he had never considered stopping was because stopping had not, in his mind, ever been a thing he was allowed to do. "Ethan?" "Ma'am?" "My name is Lila." "I know your name, ma'am." "Use it." He swallowed. He looked down at his hands for a second. Then he looked up. "Lila," he said. "Thank you." "You're welcome." "Why didn't you tell me last night when I asked if my father knew?" "Because it wasn't my place. It was Samuel's. Your father had left instructions, and I wasn't going to be the one who broke them. I figured he would find you within 48 hours, and I figured you'd come here, and I figured we would have this conversation, and I figured I would tell you the truth. And then what? And then I would tell you that you cannot come back here. Why not? Because whoever tried to take you last night is going to try again, Ethan said. And the closer you get to me, the more dangerous I become to you. Right now they think I'm a lucky security guard who got a break. If they start believing I'm something else, they'll come for me. And if they come for me, they'll come for Maya. He said her name like it cost him money. Lila was quiet for a moment. I met Samuel for coffee at 11 a.m., she said. He told me they probably know I pulled your file by 2 o'clock this afternoon. Ethan looked at his watch. It's 1:40, he said. Yes. All right. He stood up. All right, what? She said. All right, it's time for you to go. Ethan? Lila. He was already crossing to the window. He pulled the curtain back about an inch and looked down into the street. He stood there for maybe 6 seconds. Then he let the curtain fall, and he said quietly, There are 2 men in a blue Chevrolet Malibu parked at the corner of Rosemont and 7th. One of them is on a phone. The other one is looking at my building. Lila stood up. Are you sure? Ma'am, I noticed them when you got out of the cab. I was hoping I was wrong. I'm not wrong. Get your coat. Ethan, put your coat on. She put her coat on. Her hands were steady. She was surprised by how steady they were. Where's Maya? She said. At a birthday party at the community center on Ashland, 19 blocks from here. Mrs. Delgado is with her. Mrs. Delgado has my number and I have hers. Maya is safe until 3 o'clock. We have 1 hour and 20 minutes. What do we do? We are not going out the front. There's a fire escape off the bathroom window. It drops into an alley. The alley dead ends into the back parking lot of a Ukrainian grocery. My neighbor Vasil owns the grocery. He has a delivery van. He owes me a favor because I fixed his daughter's bicycle last spring. The van will take us out of this neighborhood. From there, we will figure out where you are going. I have a driver. Your driver works for your company. Your company is where this is coming from. We are not calling your driver. All right? Do you have a phone? Samuel told me to leave it at home. Samuel is correct. Give me your wallet. She handed him her wallet. He pulled out her credit cards. He left the cash. He tossed the cards onto the kitchen counter. You cannot use cards until this is over. How long? I don't know. He took her by the elbow and steered her toward the bathroom. The bathroom was small and clean, and there was a little plastic step stool in front of the sink that he had to push aside. He unlatched the window. Cold air came in. The fire escape was rusted and wet from the previous night's rain. You first, he said. Ethan, what about Maya? I'm going to call Mrs. Delgado in 30 seconds from a phone that cannot be traced. I'm going to tell her to take Maya somewhere that is not our apartment and not the community center. And I'm going to tell her not to come back until I tell her to come back. Mrs. Delgado is 64 years old, and she raised 3 sons in a country where people disappeared, and she will not ask questions. She will do exactly what I say. Maya will be safe. Now go. Lila climbed out onto the fire escape. The metal was cold under her palms. She had not climbed a fire escape since she was 11 years old, on a dare from a cousin at a wedding in Boston. She went down one flight, then another, and she was on the 2nd floor landing when she heard above her the sound of Ethan's front door being kicked in. She froze. Then Ethan was behind her on the fire escape, and his hand was on the small of her back, and he was saying very calmly, Keep moving, don't look up, don't stop. She kept moving. They got to the alley. Ethan dropped the last 6 feet and landed in a crouch, and he reached up and caught her by the waist as she came down the last few rungs, and he set her on the wet pavement as if she weighed nothing. This way. The alley was narrow, and it smelled like garbage and rain. They came out into the back lot of a Ukrainian grocery with a hand-painted sign that said something Lila couldn't read, and Ethan walked straight up to a white panel van with a dented rear bumper, and he knocked twice on the driver's side window. The man who slid the window down was small and bald and wearing a sweater that had a picture of a deer on it. He looked at Ethan. He looked at Lila. He looked back at Ethan. Trouble, he said. It was not a question. Yes. Get in the back, I drive. Ethan slid open the side door. Lila climbed in. There were cardboard boxes of jarred pickles stacked up on one side and a stack of furniture blankets on the other. Ethan pulled two of the blankets over her, and he pulled one over himself, and he slid the door shut. And Vasil, without another word, started the engine. They bumped out of the parking lot and into the street. In the dark under the blanket, Lila could hear Ethan breathing, slow, even breaths. "Where are we going?" she whispered. "Somewhere they don't know about." "Where?" "My wife's mother had a house in a little town about 90 minutes north, in the country. Nobody at Hartwell has ever heard of it. The deed is in her maiden name. It has a wood stove and no internet, and it has been empty since she died. We will go there, and we will figure out what to do next." "Your wife." "She died 4 years ago, Lila." "Oh. It's all right. I don't talk about it much." "I'm sorry." "I know you are." The van made a left, and then a right, and then another left. Vasil was a careful driver. He did not speed. He did not brake hard. He drove like a man who understood, without needing to be told, that being remembered by anyone was the thing to avoid. Under the blanket, in the dark, Lila found Ethan's hand. She did not mean to. Her hand just went out, and it found his hand, and after a moment his fingers closed around hers. His hand was warm and calloused, and there was a small scar across the knuckle of his thumb. She did not know where the scar came from. She had a feeling she would never know. "Ethan." "Yes." "I'm not going to tell you to stay away from me." "I know you're not. Why are you not arguing about it?" "Because," Ethan said in the dark, "I've been trying to stay away from you for 3 years, and it has not worked out." She did not answer. She held on to his hand, and the van went north, and the city fell away behind them, and somewhere in Lila's chest something very old and very guarded shifted half an inch to the left and did not shift back. They drove for 94 minutes. When Vasil finally pulled over, they were on a 2-lane county road with pine trees on both sides and a gravel driveway curving off to the right, and it was starting to get dark. He slid the door open, and Ethan climbed out first and then helped Lila down. Lila's hair was stuck to her neck with sweat. Her wool coat smelled like furniture blankets. She did not care. "Thank you," Ethan said to Vasil. "Is nothing," Vasil said. "Bicycle was good fix. Now we are even. You call me from somewhere not here. Not before Tuesday." He looked at Lila, and he touched the brim of his cap the way Samuel Crane had touched his, and he got back in the van, and he drove away. The house was a small white clapboard with green shutters and a crooked chimney. The porch boards had warped from weather. There was a rocking chair missing a slat. Ethan fished a key out from under a flower pot on the step and opened the door and gestured her in, and she walked into a house that smelled like dust and old wood smoke and something faint and sweet. Maybe lavender, like somebody a long time ago had kept sachets in the drawers and nobody had cleaned them out. It was not a fancy house. It was the most peaceful room Lila Hart had stood in a very long time. "Sit," Ethan said. "I'll get the stove going. There's canned soup in the cupboard. There's no cell service out here, and that's a feature. There's a landline in the kitchen. It's connected. The bill is on autopay out of a checking account that nobody knows I have. We can use the landline exactly once. I need to call Mrs. Delgado and make sure Maya is somewhere safe. Then I need to call Samuel and tell him we're out of the city. And then we sit and we wait and we figure out who in your company hates you enough to kill you." He crouched down in front of the wood stove and started building a fire with the competence of a man who had built a lot of fires. Lila watched him from the couch. The light was fading outside. A wind was coming up in the pines. "Ethan." "Yes." "Earlier you said 3 years." "I did." "You said you'd been trying to stay away from me for 3 years." He did not turn around. He was arranging kindling in a small, neat teepee. "I saw a photograph of you once," he said, "on your father's desk in a diner in Oklahoma the day he found me. You were about 22 in that picture. You were at a horse show, I think. You had dirt on your boots and you were laughing at somebody off to the side, and your hair was coming out of its ponytail, and your father said, he said, 'This is who I need you to take care of.' And I said I couldn't. And he said, 'Look at the picture, son.' And I looked at the picture." He struck a match. The kindling caught. He stood up and closed the stove door and watched the little flame through the glass. "And I thought about the little girl on the grass on the Beltway in 2008. And I thought about my own daughter. And I thought, this is not a woman who knows she needs anybody, but somebody ought to be there anyway in case she ever finds out. Lila did not say anything. He went into the kitchen. She heard him pick up the landline. She heard him dial. She heard him say, very quietly, "Mrs. Delgado? It's me." And then she heard him say a thing she did not expect. She heard him say, "Why haven't you called?" There was a silence. "When?" he said. Another silence. "How long ago?" Another. "Who picked her up?" A longer silence. Then she heard the phone click back into the cradle, very gently, in the way that a man puts a phone down when he is trying very hard not to throw it through a wall. Ethan came back into the living room. His face was perfectly still. His face was the face she had seen in the rain in the parking garage, the face of calm weather, the face of something that had already happened. "Ethan," she said. "What?" He looked at her. "Maya is not at the birthday party," he said. "Mrs. Delgado said a woman came to the community center at 1:15 with a note in my handwriting and the correct password and took Maya out to a car and drove away. Mrs. Delgado called my cell phone. My cell phone is sitting on my kitchen counter in an apartment that has been kicked open. The password I use with Mrs. Delgado is known to exactly 3 people. 2 of them are me and Mrs. Delgado." Lila stood up very slowly. "Ethan, the third," he said, "is your father's old chief of staff, a man named Russell Vance, who took over Hartwell's executive protection detail 9 months ago, and who helped me write the password on a piece of paper when I first brought Maya into the system." "Ethan. He has my daughter, Lila." He said it softly. There was no heat in it. There was nothing in it at all. He walked across the room to the front window, and he pulled back the curtain, and he looked out at the darkening road, and he stood there for a long time without moving. Outside, somewhere in the pines, an owl called once and went quiet. Inside, the fire in the wood stove popped and settled, and Lila Hart stood in the middle of a stranger's living room with her hand pressed against her own mouth, and she watched the back of the man who had saved her life twice, and she watched his shoulders set. He stood at the window for a long time. Lila watched his shoulders. She had heard, once, somebody say that you could tell everything about a man from the back of his neck, and she had thought at the time that it was the sort of thing people said in magazines. Standing in the dim front room of a dead woman's house in the middle of nowhere, looking at the back of Ethan Cole's neck, while he processed the news that a man he had trusted had taken his 6-year-old daughter, she understood what the person had meant. The skin above his collar was pale. A small muscle was working in the hinge of his jaw. His right hand, hanging at his side, had gone very still, and it was the stillness, not movement, that frightened her. "Ethan," she said. He didn't answer. "Ethan, give me a minute." She gave him a minute. She gave him 2. The fire in the wood stove settled with a small domestic sound. A log shifted. Somewhere in the walls a mouse ran across a joist and stopped. Finally he turned around. His face was not the face of a man falling apart. His face was the face of a man who had just walked in the space of about 30 seconds from one kind of life to another and who had no intention of walking back. "All right," he said. "All right, what?" "All right, I need you to listen to me for about 90 seconds, and I need you not to argue." "Ethan, 90 seconds. "All right." He crossed the room. He sat down on the edge of the coffee table, directly in front of her, and he put his elbows on his knees and laced his fingers together, and he looked her in the eye, and he spoke very quietly. "Russell Vance has my daughter," he said. "He did not take her to hurt her. He took her because he wants me to come to him, because he is afraid of me, because he has figured out, probably around 2 o'clock this afternoon, that I am not a lucky security guard. He does not want her dead. A dead 6-year-old is a body he has to explain. A live 6-year-old is a leash. So the first thing you need to understand is that Maya is not going to be hurt tonight. Not tonight, maybe not tomorrow. But every hour after that, the odds get worse, and by the weekend they are very bad. So we have a window. The window is not long. We are going to use it." "All right. The second thing you need to understand is that I am not going to go get her tonight. I want to. Every single cell in my body wants to. But Vance is expecting me to come in hot and stupid, and if I do that, he will kill her, and he will kill me, and he will kill you, and he will call it a tragedy, and he will run your company. So we are not going to do what he expects." "What are we going to do?" "I don't know yet. I know 3 things. I know Samuel Crane is meeting you at 9 o'clock at a fishing cabin in Willow Grove. I know Samuel Crane had a list of 3 names that your father left him before he died. And I know Russell Vance is on that list because your father was not a stupid man, and he did not put a chief of staff in a position to control his daughter's security detail without already suspecting him. So we go to Willow Grove. We go to Willow Grove, we get the other 2 names, we get anything else Samuel has. And while we are there, you and I are going to have a conversation about what you are willing to do to save a little girl you've never met. And after that conversation, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do, and you are going to decide whether you can live with it. I can live with it. Lila. Ethan, I can live with it. You don't know what it is yet. I don't care what it is. He looked at her for a long moment. You might later, he said. Then we'll deal with it later. He almost smiled. It was the first expression that had crossed his face since he had come back from the kitchen. It didn't last. All right, he said. Willow Grove is about 40 minutes from here. There's a truck in the barn out back. It was her husband's. It hasn't been driven in 2 years, and I don't know if it will start. Put your coat on. Ethan. Yes. Are you all right? He looked at her. For a second, just a second, the mask slipped, and she saw something in his face that she had not expected. Not rage, not fear, something more like grief. The kind of grief that arrives ahead of time, the kind a man feels when he is beginning to suspect that the thing he loves most is going to ask him to do something that will cost him pieces of himself he has not yet been asked to spend. Then the mask came back. I'll be all right, he said, when my daughter is asleep in her own bed. He went out the back door. Lila stood alone in the front room for a moment, and then she followed him. The barn was 50 feet behind the house, and it was leaning about 6 degrees to the left. And the door made a sound like something dying when Ethan pulled it open. Inside, under a canvas tarp, was a Ford F-150 from some year in the late 1990s, red where it wasn't rust, with 4 hubcaps that did not match each other. Ethan pulled the tarp off and folded it and set it on a workbench. He checked the oil. He checked the battery, which was dead, and he jumped it off an older battery that was sitting on a shelf and that he apparently knew was there. The engine turned over twice and caught on the 3rd try and settled into a rough, uneven idle that sounded to Lila's ear like it was going to quit at any minute. It did not quit. Get in. She got in. The passenger seat had a tear across the middle that had been patched with duct tape. The floor mat was missing. There was a crumpled napkin from a diner she'd never heard of in the cup holder, and on the dashboard there was a small plastic figure of a cartoon bear, the kind that came in a kid's meal, and Lila looked at the little bear and did not ask. Ethan backed the truck out. He drove slowly down the gravel drive with his headlights off until they hit the paved road, and then he flicked them on, and he drove. The pine trees went by in the dark. He did not speak for the first 10 minutes. Then, without taking his eyes off the road, he said, Maya is going to ask where I was. When? When this is over. When I pick her up. She's going to ask where I was, and she's going to ask why it took me so long, and I'm going to have to tell her the truth, because I promised her I would never lie to her, and I don't break promises to my daughter. What's the truth? The truth is that I let myself get distracted. The truth is that I have been pretending for 18 months that I could do this job with one eye closed, because the alternative was doing it with both eyes open, and doing it with both eyes open was a thing I swore I would never do again. Ethan, I'm not asking for reassurance, Lila. I'm telling you what's true. I took my eye off her. This is my fault. Ethan Cole, this is not your fault. It is absolutely my fault. It is the fault of a man named Russell Vance, who took a child. Russell Vance took a child because I let him close enough to know I had one. He was not shouting. He was not even raising his voice. He was just saying it, flat, the way a man reads an audit to himself in the morning. Lila stared at him for a long moment. The dashboard glow was green against the side of his face. He did not look at her. He drove. Ethan. Yes. When we get to that cabin, I'm going to do whatever you tell me to do. I'm going to sit where you tell me to sit and be quiet when you tell me to be quiet. I am going to trust you because you are the person in this truck who knows how to get my father's goddaughter back from a man who should have been fired 18 months ago and was not because I was too busy running my company to look at my own house. He was quiet for a beat. Goddaughter, he said. What? You said goddaughter. Maya isn't your goddaughter. Lila pressed the heel of her hand against her forehead. I don't know why I said that, she said. I'm sorry. You said it because somewhere in your head she already is. He didn't look at her when he said it. He just said it, and he kept driving, and the silence after it was not uncomfortable. The road curved, the trees opened. On the left, through the dark, there was a glimmer of water, a small lake, pewter-colored under a scrap of moon. The sign at the turnoff had been pulled down at some point, and the post was empty, but Ethan took the turn without hesitating, the way a man takes a turn he has been told about from someone he trusts. The cabin was at the end of a dirt road. There were no other houses on the road. There was one light on in the front window. Ethan killed the headlights 100 yards out and let the truck coast. He stopped it in the shadow of a stand of birches and put it in park and killed the engine. Stay in the truck, he said. Ethan, for 90 seconds, Lila, let me clear the cabin. If Samuel is in there alone, I will come back and get you. If he is not alone, I need you in this truck, with the keys in the ignition and the doors locked, and I need you to drive if you hear anything that sounds wrong. I don't know how to drive a stick. It's automatic. Put it in D and go. I'll meet you at the Texaco station in Willow Grove proper. Do you understand me? Yes. Repeat it. Texaco in Willow Grove. Put it in D and go. Good. He got out. He shut the door without slamming it. He disappeared into the trees on the left side of the road, and he moved through them without making any sound at all. And Lila sat in a rusted red pickup truck in the dark and watched him go. And she understood for the first time that the man she was watching had probably done this exact thing in various dark places several hundred times, and that it was only in the last 4 years that he had pretended otherwise. 90 seconds passed. They passed slowly. Then there was a soft double tap on the passenger side window. Lila jumped. Ethan's face was on the other side of the glass. It's me. She unlocked the door. He opened it. He's alone, he said. He's in the kitchen. He has one weapon on the table, and he is not happy to see me. Is he? He's fine. Come on. They walked up to the cabin together. The porch boards creaked. Before Ethan could knock, the door opened, and Samuel Crane stood there in his same flannel shirt and his same Carhartt jacket, and his face, when he saw Lila, did something that Lila had not seen on it that morning. It softened. For about 1 second, then it hardened again. You brought him, Samuel said. Yes. I told you to come alone. I did come alone. He was already with me when you told me. Samuel looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Samuel. Neither of them moved for about 3 seconds. Then Samuel stepped aside. Get in the house, he said. Both of you. We don't have as long as I thought. The cabin was one big room with a kitchen at one end and a stone fireplace at the other, and a handful of mismatched chairs scattered in between. There was a rifle leaning in the corner by the door. There were 2 old lanterns on the kitchen table, both lit, kerosene. No overhead lights. A legal pad and a pen were open on the table next to a cup of coffee. The coffee was old. The legal pad was half full of Samuel Crane's small, square, unhurried handwriting. He did not offer them coffee. Sit, he said. They sat. He looked at Ethan for a long moment. Sergeant. Mr. Crane. It's been a while. Yes, sir. I assume by the fact that you're sitting in my kitchen instead of in your apartment with your daughter that the situation is worse than I thought it was this morning. Russell Vance took Maya out of a birthday party at 1:15 this afternoon using the code word and my forged handwriting. Samuel Crane closed his eyes. He did not open them for a moment. When he did, he looked every one of his 70 years. I was afraid of that, he said. Why? Because I told him at 11:30 this morning that I was meeting with Miss Hart for lunch. I did not tell him what about. I did not tell him where. But I told him I was meeting with her because I was going to be off the office phone for 2 hours, and he is the chief of staff, and it is my job to tell him those things. He is also, I have been assuming for about 6 months, the man who has been trying to have her killed. You assumed it for 6 months, Lila said. Samuel turned his head and looked at her, and there was something in his eyes she had not seen that morning either. It was shame. Yes, Miss Hart, I have assumed it for 6 months. I have not had proof. I have had patterns. I have had 3 incidents that could have been coincidence and were probably not. I have had a gut feeling that has kept me up at night. What I have not had was a piece of evidence that would hold up in a room full of lawyers. And without that piece, any move I made against him would have gotten me fired before it got him fired. So I have been waiting. And while I have been waiting, he has been moving. And tonight he has moved on a child, and that is on me. Samuel, Lila said. It is on me, Miss Hart. Don't be kind about it. I sat on a suspicion for 6 months, and a 6-year-old is the price, and I am going to live with that for whatever is left of my life. Ethan leaned forward. Samuel, Sergeant, I need the other 2 names. The other 2 names are on the pad. One is a board member. One is an outside counsel. Both of them take money from Vance. Neither of them, I believe, knows about the child. Vance has compartmented this. He has been compartmenting it for a long time. Where would he take her? I don't know. Samuel. Sergeant, I don't know. He has 3 properties in his name. He has a 4th in his wife's family's name. He has a hunting lodge that is leased through a shell company. He has access, legally, to 11 Hartwell facilities. He could be at any of those places. He could be at a motel. He could be at a friend's house. I don't know. Ethan leaned back. He looked up at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked at Samuel. What time is it? 9:26. At 10 o'clock, Ethan said, I need you to call Russell Vance, and I need you to tell him something. What? Tell him you've been thinking about what Miss Hart told you at lunch. Tell him she was asking questions about me. Tell him you got worried and you pulled her off site to a location only you know, and you are prepared to hand her over to him personally tonight if he agrees to a certain condition. What condition? That I come with her. In cuffs. Lila stared at him. Ethan, let me finish. You are not... Lila, let me finish. She shut up. Ethan turned back to Samuel. Tell him I broke into her apartment this afternoon and took her at gunpoint. Tell him I thought I was saving her and Miss Hart thought I was insane. Tell him she called you from a payphone. Tell him the 2 of you got the drop on me in a parking lot and you have me restrained in the back of your car. Tell him you want this to end tonight. Tell him you want me handed over so you can make me disappear. And you want Miss Hart handed over so the 2 of you can have the conversation that you, Samuel, should have had with her 6 months ago. Tell him you will give him the location in 30 minutes. Tell him to come alone with my daughter. Tell him if he brings one other person, the deal is off and you will put both of us in the wind. Samuel Crane looked at him for a long time. Sergeant, he said, Russell Vance is not a stupid man. No. He's going to be suspicious. Yes, he's going to bring people. I'm counting on it. How many people? Not more than 3. He's a planner, Samuel. He's not a fighter. He won't want to walk into a place he hasn't scouted with a parade. 2 shooters and a driver. That's my guess. He'll keep Maya in the car with the driver. And he will expect you in restraints. I will be in restraints. Real ones. Real ones. Lila made a sound. Ethan looked at her. Lila. You are going to let a man who has been paying people to kill me for 6 months put you in handcuffs. Yes, in front of my father's oldest friend who used to work for that same man and who has been wrong about him for 6 months. Yes. And you trust this to work because Samuel's not wrong about him anymore, Ethan said. And because when Vance sees me in the cuffs, he's going to relax by about 15%, and 15% is all I need. All you need for what? For him to walk to me. Because he will, Lila. He's going to want to look me in the face. He's going to want to say something. He has been hiding from me in that building for 18 months without knowing he was hiding, and tonight he is going to get to put his hand on me and say whatever it is he has been saving up, and he will not be able to resist it. And when he is close enough, I am going to take his gun, and I am going to put him on the ground, and we are going to get my daughter out of that car. And the shooters. Samuel will take the shooters. Samuel Crane raised his eyebrows. Will I? Samuel, you were a gunner's mate on a destroyer in 1977, and you shot competitive pistol until your knees gave out in 2014. You've got a rifle leaning against that wall over there that is not a hunting rifle. You know exactly what I am asking you to do. Samuel Crane looked at the rifle. He looked back at Ethan. I am 71 years old, Sergeant. Yes, sir. My eyes are not what they were. The range will be under 40 yards. If you miss at 40 yards, we are all dead. and I would rather be dead than keep living in a world where Samuel Crane missed a 40-yard shot. Samuel Crane did something that startled Lila so much she almost came out of her chair. He laughed. It was a short, dry laugh, more like a cough, and it did not last, but it was a real one. "All right, Sergeant," he said. "All right, what's the location?" "The drainage ditch road behind the old Hartwell Research Annex in Callan County. It's been closed since 2019. The lot behind it is blacktop. 3 ways in, 2 exits blocked by concrete barricades, 1 clean exit to the north, long sight lines. You can set up on the water tower and have the entire lot from the catwalk. I'll be in the middle of the lot, on my knees, in cuffs. Miss Hart will be approximately 30 feet behind me and to my right, in your custody." "How do you know this place?" "Because I did a walkthrough of it 2 months after I got hired, because I don't like not knowing what's around my workplace." "Of course you did. Vance will pull in from the south. He'll see the cuffs. He'll send his shooters to clear the corners. When they move to clear the corners, you will shoot them. Vance will freeze because he will not have been expecting that. I will be up by then. I will handle Vance. The driver will try to run with Maya in the car. The driver will not get far because I will have let the air out of 3 tires before I went to my knees." "When will you have let the air out of 3 tires?" "In the 30 seconds between when they walk me to the middle of the lot and when they cuff me." Samuel Crane stared at him. "Sergeant, are you trying to impress me?" "A little bit, sir." "It's working." They looked at each other. For about 2 seconds, across the lantern light, with a legal pad full of traitors' names on the table between them, a thing passed between the 2 men that Lila could not have put a word to if she had been given an hour. It was not affection. It was older than affection. It was the thing 2 men share when one of them has decided, for reasons of his own, that he would rather die doing a thing right than live having done it wrong. And the other one has understood it without needing it explained. Samuel picked up the phone. 10 o'clock, he said. "I'll make the call." Lila stood up. "I need to talk to Ethan." Samuel nodded. "I'll step out." He took the rifle with him. He left the phone on the table. He went out the back door and they heard his footsteps on the porch, and then on the gravel, and then nothing. Lila did not sit down. Ethan stood up. They were standing about 3 feet apart, under the kerosene lanterns, in a dead woman's kitchen, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "Ethan," she said finally, "if this goes wrong." "It isn't going to go wrong." "Ethan, if this goes wrong," he looked at her, "then my little girl is going to grow up with Mrs. Delgado, and with an inheritance that's already in a trust, and with a letter I wrote her when she was 4 that she will be allowed to open on her 18th birthday, and which contains, more or less, every single thing I have ever wanted her to know. That's not a plan. That's a contingency." "Yes." "You have had that contingency in place for how long?" "Since the day I brought her home from the hospital." Lila closed her eyes. "Ethan Cole," she said, "you are the saddest man I have ever met." "I know. I am not saying that to wound you. I know you're not." She opened her eyes. She stepped forward. She put her hand, flat, against the center of his chest, over the worn cotton of his t-shirt, over the place where a round had grazed him 24 hours ago, and which he had not mentioned. "If this goes wrong," she said, "I'm going to find Russell Vance myself, and I'm going to bury him in a way that involves lawyers and grand juries and federal sentencing guidelines. And I'm going to walk Maya into a courtroom when she is 10 years old to watch him be sentenced, because that is what I can do. And I'm going to raise her, Ethan, if this goes wrong. I am going to raise her, and I'm going to tell her about the man who pulled me out of a burning car in 2008, and the man who came to get her tonight, and I am going to tell her that her father was both of those men, and that I owe him everything, and that I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure she knows it." Ethan did not move. His hand came up very slowly and covered hers against his chest. "Lila. Don't. Lila. Don't. Don't. If you say something kind to me right now, I am going to fall apart, and I cannot fall apart for another 6 hours, and after that I am going to fall apart in a way that takes about a week." "All right." He held her hand against his chest. He did not say something kind to her. He did not say anything. His heart beat under her palm, slow and steady, and for a moment she understood why her father had looked at this man over a table in a diner in Oklahoma and decided to trust him with the only thing in the world he loved. "All right," she said. "All right. I'm going to let go of you now." "All right." She let go of him. She took a step back. She wiped, with 2 fingers, very quickly, under each of her eyes. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair, and she put it on. "Samuel," she called. The back door opened. Samuel Crane came back in. If he had heard anything, his face did not say so. "Ready when you are, Miss Hart. Make the call." Samuel sat down at the table. He picked up the phone. He took a breath, and then he dialed. 3 rings. 4. "Russell?" A pause. "Listen to me." A longer pause. Samuel's face did not move. "No." "Listen, she called me from a payphone 30 minutes ago. She's safe, but she's with me, and I've got him with her." A pause. "The security guard, Cole. He grabbed her out of her apartment at 3:30 this afternoon, and he was driving her somewhere when he stopped for gas in Willow Grove. She picked up a payphone when he went to the bathroom. I was 11 miles away. I caught up to them at a diner on Route 9. A pause. "Yes." A pause. "I have him restrained. Yes. I have his wrists. He's in the back of my vehicle, and he is not going anywhere. Now you listen to me, Russell. I know what you've been doing. I have known for months. I have not said a word because I wanted to be sure, and now I am sure, and I want this to end tonight." A pause. "Bring the child." A pause. "Yes, the child. I don't care why you took her. I don't want to know. Bring her to me. I hand you Cole, I hand you Miss Hart, and we all walk away. I retire to my cabin. You run the company. Miss Hart signs over her shares. Cole goes into a landfill, and we never speak of this again." A long pause. "1 hour, Samuel said. "The old research annex in Callan County. Come alone, or with exactly as many men as you need to drive the car and nothing more. If I see a convoy, I put all 3 of them in a ditch myself, and you will never know where. And you will spend the rest of your life wondering when Miss Hart's cousins decide to come asking." A short pause. 1 hour, Russell." He hung up the phone. He looked at Ethan. "He bought it." "How much of it?" 90%. He'll bring shooters. He'll bring the girl. He wants to look you in the eye." "Good. Sergeant." "Sir." "If this goes sideways, it won't." "Sergeant." "If this goes sideways, she lives. Do you understand me? I don't care how it gets done. Miss Hart lives. I have not done enough right in my life, and I am trying one time to do a thing right." "She lives, Samuel. And the child. And the child." Samuel Crane nodded once. He stood up. He took the rifle out of the corner and he laid it on the table. He opened a drawer and took out a box of ammunition and loaded the magazine with the slow, deliberate motions of a man whose hands remembered the work, even if his eyes were worse than they had been. He set the rifle back down. Then he turned to a cabinet under the sink, and he opened it, and he took out a pair of steel handcuffs, and he laid those on the table too. "These were your father's," he said to Lila. "He kept them here. I don't know why. I think he thought it was funny." She did not laugh. Ethan picked up the cuffs. He turned them over in his hands, feeling the weight of them, and then he set them back down on the table. 58 minutes, he said. 58 minutes, Samuel said. Lila picked up her coat again, and she walked to the door, and she stepped out onto the porch. The night was cold. The lake was flat and black. There were no stars, because there were still clouds from the night before, and there was no sound except the small wet ticking of water moving against the reeds at the shore. She stood with her hands in her pockets, and she looked at the water, and behind her, through the cabin door, she could hear the two men talking very quietly, very calmly, about angles and sightlines and muzzle velocity, the way two men talk about a thing they have done many times before in places they no longer speak of. Lila Hart, 25 years old, worth approximately $460 million, CEO of a defense company her father had built out of a single hangar in 1971, closed her eyes, and she thought about a little girl she had never met who was, at that exact moment, almost certainly awake in the back seat of a car somewhere, scared, with a stranger. She thought about the red pickup truck in the trees. She thought about a little plastic bear on a dashboard. She thought about a photograph her father had kept on his desk, of her at a horse show when she was 22, with dirt on her boots, laughing at something off to the side. and she thought for the first time in her life that maybe the man her father had chosen was the right man, and maybe she was the right woman, and maybe the thing they were about to do together was the thing her father had been quietly hoping for, in some corner of himself, in all the years he had not lived to see. Behind her, the cabin door opened. Ethan stepped out. He was wearing a dark jacket now, one of Samuel's, that fit him badly in the shoulders. He was carrying the handcuffs. He walked to the edge of the porch and he stood beside her, and he looked out at the water, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. "It's time," he said, finally. "I know." "Lila." "Yes." "If you want to stay here." "I don't. I am asking one time because I have to. If you want to stay here, Samuel and I will go, and we will come back, and we will bring her." "I don't want to stay here, Ethan." "All right. You might need me." "I might." "Then I'm coming." He nodded. He held out the handcuffs to her. "You hold these. In the truck, put them on me yourself. Samuel will be driving. When we get there, you get out and you walk me to the middle of the lot on a 3-foot lead of rope that Samuel has. You do not look at me. You do not speak to me. You look past me, over my shoulder, and you wait for Vance to show up. When he pulls in, you let go of the rope and you step back 30 feet. Samuel will be on the water tower with the rifle. When the shooting starts, you go flat, on your stomach, hands over your head. Do not get up until I come and get you. Do you understand me?" "I understand you." "Repeat it." "I walk you out on the rope. I let go. I step back 30 feet. When shots are fired, I go flat, hands over my head, and I wait for you." "Good." "Ethan." "Yes." "Come get me." He looked at her. "I will come get you, Lila Hart." "All right." She took the handcuffs. They were heavier than she had expected. The metal was warm from his hand. He turned and walked down the porch steps and across the gravel to the red pickup truck. And Samuel came out behind her carrying the rifle, and together they walked down to the truck, and Samuel got behind the wheel, and Ethan climbed into the passenger seat, and Lila climbed into the middle of the bench seat, between them, with the handcuffs in her lap. The engine turned over on the second try. Samuel put it in gear. The red pickup truck rolled down the dirt road, past the dark cabin, past the water, past the birches where Ethan had walked through the trees without making a sound, and out onto the paved county road. The clouds overhead thickened. The temperature dropped 1 more degree. 53 minutes remained. Samuel Crane drove. Nobody spoke. The old research annex sat at the end of a 2-lane county road that had not been resurfaced since the plant shut down in 2019. The asphalt was cracked in long seams, and there was crabgrass coming up through the cracks, and the chain-link fence around the property had been knocked down in one place by a vehicle a long time ago and never put back up. Samuel drove the red pickup past the collapsed section of fence, over the broken asphalt, and into a loading yard the size of a high school football field. He killed the headlights 50 feet before he stopped. The moon had cut loose of the clouds. Not a full moon, but enough. It laid a thin silver wash across the blacktop, and against the far side of the lot, the old water tower stood up black and bony against the sky, a rusted ladder running up one of its legs, a catwalk ringing the tank at the top. Samuel parked the truck at an angle, the way a man with a hostage in the back would park, so that anybody driving in from the south entrance would see the truck before they saw what was around it. 41 minutes, Samuel said. Enough. Ethan was already out of the truck. He had a tire iron in his hand, taken from behind the seat, and he walked straight across the lot to the south entrance, and he vanished into the dark. Lila watched him go, watched the place where he had gone, until her eyes started making shapes that weren't there. Samuel put his hand on her forearm very briefly, and then he took the rifle and he walked to the base of the water tower, and he started to climb. He climbed slowly. He had to. He was 71 years old, and the rungs were iced with old paint, and Lila stood next to the red pickup truck with a pair of steel handcuffs in her coat pocket, and watched an old man climb a tower for her, and she did not breathe until his boots hit the catwalk, and he lay down flat, and his silhouette disappeared into the line of the tank. She was alone. The lot was very quiet. Somewhere a long way off, a freight train was going through. She could hear it the way you hear your own heartbeat in a pillow, more felt than listened to. Ethan came back across the lot. He was walking quickly but not running. He reached her and said, "It's done. 3 of the 4 tires on the far side of the south entrance are going to be flat by the time they try to leave. I only needed 3. Give me the cuffs." She gave him the cuffs. He sat down on the tailgate of the pickup, and he put one bracelet around his right wrist and clicked it shut. He held the other one out to her. "Behind my back, tight. Don't make it fake. If he sees a loose cuff, we're done." Ethan. Lila, tight. She moved around behind him. He put his hands at the small of his back, the right wrist already cuffed. She took the second bracelet. She hesitated. "Tighter than you want to," he said, without turning around. "I've got a key in my boot. Put it on." She put it on. She closed it 3 clicks past where she thought she should, and she felt the metal bite into the skin just above the bone of his wrist, and her eyes filled up for 1 second, and then she squeezed them shut and opened them again, and by the time she came back around in front of him, her face was the face of a CEO. "Good," he said. He slid off the tailgate. Samuel had left a length of clothesline rope on the seat. Lila picked it up. She looped it twice around the chain between the cuffs, and she knotted it, and she held the other end in her right hand. 34 minutes, Ethan said, looking at his watch. Left wrist, she noticed. "Walk me out." They walked. She walked him out into the middle of the blacktop. Her boot sounded loud on the cracked asphalt. Ethan walked a half step behind her and to her left, the rope taut, his head slightly bowed. And any man driving into that lot from the south entrance would see a woman in a wool coat leading a handcuffed man on a rope toward the center of the yard. And he would see nothing else because that was the whole point. At the center of the lot, Ethan stopped and sank down onto his knees. "Drop the rope," he said quietly. "Step back 30 feet. Remember what I told you. Flat on my stomach, hands over my head. Don't move until you come." "That's right." "Ethan." "Yes." "The key in your boot." "Left boot, inside, against the ankle." "All right. All right." She stepped back. 10 paces. 20. 30. Her heels crunched grit. She stopped at 30 feet and she turned herself halfway, so she could see Ethan and the south entrance both without turning her head, and she put her hands in her coat pockets to keep them from shaking, and she waited. The minutes went. She did not look at her watch. She looked at Ethan's shoulders. He was on his knees with his head down in a posture that any camera, any stranger, any man arriving with intent would read as defeat, and only Lila, watching from 30 feet, could see the angle of his weight shifted forward onto the balls of his feet, and the way his breathing made his jacket move in a slow, measured rhythm that had nothing to do with fear. Headlights came around the curve at the south entrance. She did not move. The vehicle rolled in slow. A black Chevrolet Suburban, newer model, dealer plate still on it, the kind of vehicle a man borrowed from a friend who would not ask questions. It crossed the broken asphalt and came to a stop about 60 feet from where Ethan was kneeling, and it sat there with its engine running and its headlights on, and the driver's side window came down about 2 inches. Nothing happened for 10 seconds. Then the back doors opened. 2 men got out, both in dark coats, both with pistols held low along the seams of their trousers. One was big, and the other was bigger. They did not look at Ethan. They looked the way Ethan had told Samuel they would look, at the corners of the lot. The shed at the east edge, the collapsed loading dock to the west, the shadow under the water tower where an old fuel pump leaned sideways against its pad. The bigger of the 2 men walked toward the west. The other walked toward the east. From the water tower there was a sound so small and flat that Lila almost missed it, and the bigger of the 2 men on the west side of the lot stopped walking and went down onto the blacktop without ever lifting his gun. A second flat sound, and the man on the east side of the lot turned a quarter turn as if somebody had called his name, and then he went down too. The whole thing took 3 seconds. The driver of the Suburban said something loud in the cab. Lila heard it through the cracked window, a short, sharp syllable, and then the rear passenger door on the driver's side opened, and Russell Vance stepped out. He was 60 years old, silver-haired, wearing a long charcoal overcoat over a charcoal suit, and he was holding, in his right hand, a black semi-automatic pistol. In his left hand, he was holding the hand of a 6-year-old girl with a pink coat and a barrette shaped like a butterfly in her hair. And her face was wet with tears, but she was not making any sound, and Lila understood, in a single awful second, that the child had been told not to cry, and that she was trying very hard to obey. "Samuel," Vance said across the lot. His voice was thin and furious. "Samuel Crane, you lying—" He did not finish. Ethan was already up. He had come off his knees in one motion, and the rope around the cuffs had come loose, and his hands came out from behind his back in two pieces because one of the pieces was a handcuff key between his fingers that he had pulled from his boot while on his knees, and the other piece was a pistol that he had also pulled from his boot while on his knees, which Lila had not known about and which Samuel had given him in the cabin while she had been out on the porch looking at the water. Ethan did not shoot Vance. He shot, first, the driver of the Suburban through the cracked window, a single round that punched the glass out of the frame and the driver down across the center console, and the Suburban's engine kept running because Vance had told the driver to keep it running. Ethan shot, second, the pavement 10 feet in front of Vance's boots. The shot scuffed up blacktop and rock chips, and Vance jumped as if he had been struck, and he pulled Maya in against his hip, and he put the muzzle of his pistol against the side of her head. Everybody froze. For a long, slow second, there was absolutely no sound in that lot except the idle of the Suburban and the faint, reedy hiss of air leaking from 3 punctured tires. "Ethan Cole," Vance said. His voice had steadied. Something like a smile moved across his mouth. "Well, here we are." Ethan did not answer. He was standing in the middle of the blacktop with his pistol up at a low ready, held in both hands, his eyes on Vance, and Lila saw, even from 30 feet, that the muzzle was not trembling at all. "I'm going to say something," Vance said, "and I'm going to ask you to listen very carefully. Are you listening?" Ethan did not answer. "I have the girl," Vance said. "I have the girl, and I have a round in the chamber, and my finger is on the trigger, and if you so much as breathe in the wrong cadence, I will open her head. Do you understand me? Put the pistol on the ground." Ethan did not move. "Put it on the ground, Sergeant." "Let her go," Ethan said. It was the first time he had spoken since the headlights had come around the curve. His voice was soft. "Let her go, Russell, and this ends with you in a cell." "I don't want a cell." "Nobody does." "Put the gun on the ground." "Russell, put it down." "Russell, look at me. Look at my face." Vance looked at him, and Lila, watching from 30 feet, saw the thing that Ethan had been counting on the entire time. She saw the moment Russell Vance understood, from across a stretch of broken asphalt, under the cold white wash of a Suburban's headlights, that the man standing in front of him with a pistol was not a lucky security guard, and was not a soldier on leave, and was not a grieving father, and was, in fact, something Russell Vance had read about in sealed files he was not cleared to see, and had dismissed as exaggeration. Vance's arm twitched. He was going to shoot. From the water tower, a third flat sound traveled across the lot, and Russell Vance's right wrist came apart in a fine red mist, and the pistol dropped from his hand and clattered against the blacktop. And in the quarter second it took him to process that his hand was gone, Ethan Cole had crossed 27 feet of asphalt and put his boot on the fallen pistol and his own pistol against Vance's forehead and his left hand on Maya's shoulder. "Let go of her, Russell." Vance had made a small, high sound, not quite a scream, and he was looking at the place where his hand had been. "Let her go." Vance let her go. Ethan pulled Maya behind him without taking his eyes off Vance. "Baby, don't look." Maya did not look. She turned her face into the back of her father's leg, and she wrapped both her small arms around his thigh, and she pressed her forehead against the coarse dark fabric of Samuel's borrowed jacket, and she made a single sound that was not a sob exactly, but a short, sharp breath that Lila felt land in her chest from 30 feet away. "Lila!" Ethan called without turning. "Come here, slowly." Lila came. She crossed the asphalt on legs that did not feel like her legs. She came up behind Ethan and she went down on one knee next to Maya, and without thinking about it, without asking permission, without knowing any better, she opened her arms and Maya let go of her father's leg and stepped sideways and walked straight into them. She was a very small child. Her hair smelled like strawberry shampoo. Her coat was thin under Lila's hands. "I'm Lila," Lila said against her hair. "I'm a friend of your daddy's. You're okay. I've got you." Maya nodded against her shoulder. Lila lifted her up. The child weighed maybe 42 pounds, and she settled into Lila's arms the way small children do with people they have, for reasons known only to them, decided to trust. Lila stood up with her. "Walk to the truck, Lila. Ethan said, still without turning. Samuel will meet you there. Put her in the middle. Start the engine. Do not look back. Do you understand me? I understand. Go. She went. She walked across the blacktop with a 6-year-old in her arms, past the body of the shooter on the east side, past the body of the shooter on the west side, past the Suburban with its cracked window and its running engine, and she did not look back. Behind her, she heard Ethan say very quietly, in a voice she would remember until she died, "Russell, sit down." She heard Russell Vance sit down. She kept walking. At the red pickup truck, Samuel Crane was already at the bottom of the water tower, coming toward her with the rifle in one hand. He did not ask if she was all right. He did not ask if the child was all right. He opened the truck door, and he helped her in with Maya in her arms, and he got behind the wheel, and he started the engine, and he did not drive. "We're waiting," he said. "For what?" "For him to finish." She did not ask what finish meant. In her lap, Maya had stopped shaking. The child was very quiet. Her small hand was wound into a fistful of Lila's coat, and her eyes were closed, and her breathing was slowing. Lila put one hand on the back of the child's head and held it there, and she felt for the first time in her adult life a thing she had no name for. "Maya," she said softly. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Maya nodded, eyes still shut. "Your daddy is going to be right here in a minute, all right?" "All right." "I'm not going anywhere." "All right." Outside, across the lot, Ethan Cole was standing over a man who had tried to kill, in order, a 25-year-old woman in a parking garage, a 6-year-old girl at a birthday party, and a security guard who had spent 18 months pretending to be a ghost. He did not kill him. He stood in front of him for about 2 minutes. He was speaking, but Lila could not hear the words. And later she would decide she did not want to. Then he handcuffed Russell Vance's left wrist to a steel rail on the side of the Suburban, and he picked up Vance's fallen pistol, and he wiped it down on his jacket, and he dropped it in a storm drain at the edge of the lot. Then he walked back across the blacktop, slowly, without any hurry at all, and Lila watched him come. He reached the truck. He opened the door. He looked at his daughter in Lila's lap. "Hi, monkey," he said. Maya's eyes flew open. "Daddy." She came across the seat into him like a small, determined animal, and he caught her, and he held her against the crook of his neck, and he closed his eyes. He stood there for about 10 seconds with his face in his daughter's hair. Then he opened his eyes, and he looked at Lila, and he said quietly, "Thank you." She could not speak. He climbed into the cab with Maya still clinging to his chest, and he pulled the door shut, and Samuel Crane, without a word, put the truck in gear and drove them out of the lot. He drove past the broken section of fence, back onto the county road, past the collapsed sign at the turnoff, and into the dark. Behind them, at the edge of the lot, Russell Vance was handcuffed to the side of his own Suburban, and the Suburban's engine was still running, and the 3 tires on the far side of its south exit were flat. And in 31 minutes, a state trooper would come up that county road on an anonymous tip phoned in from a payphone at a gas station in Callan, and what the state trooper would find would begin an investigation that would, over the following 11 weeks, close 3 separate conspiracies inside Hartwell Defense Systems and lead to the indictment of a board member, an outside counsel, and a former chief of staff who had lost his right hand to a 71-year-old former gunner's mate with a rifle that, despite all rumors to the contrary, he could still shoot at 40 yards in the dark. In the cab of the red pickup truck, on a 2-lane county road in the middle of nowhere, 3 people and a child drove back toward a small white clapboard house with green shutters. Samuel drove. Ethan sat with his daughter against his chest and his free hand around Lila's hand, which was on the bench seat between them, and which he had taken without asking and without letting go. Maya had fallen asleep by the time they reached the cabin. Nobody spoke the entire way. The wood stove was still warm when they came through the door. Ethan carried Maya into the back bedroom and laid her down on the old quilt that had come with the house, and he pulled her shoes off, and he covered her up, and he sat on the edge of the bed for a long time with his hand on her back. Lila stood in the doorway and watched. She did not feel like she was watching something that wasn't hers to watch. For reasons she did not want to look at directly yet, she felt like she was watching the beginning of something she had been waiting for her whole life. After a while, Ethan stood up. He came to the doorway. He stopped beside her. He did not touch her, but they were standing close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off his arm. "She's going to have nightmares for a while," he said quietly. "I know. A long while. I know, Ethan." "All right." They stood there in the doorway. In the front room, at the kitchen table, Samuel Crane had poured 3 fingers of something out of a bottle he had found in the cabinet, and he was drinking it slowly. He looked up at them once, and he looked away, and he left them alone. "Lila." "Yes." "I don't know how to do this part." "What part?" He almost laughed. There was no sound in it. "The part after," he said. "I've never done the part after." "Neither have I." "No." He was quiet for a moment. "My wife," he said. "Sarah. I loved her. I want you to know that. I loved her, and I was not a good husband to her at the end because I was not in a good place, and she was already sick, and I let her go through a lot of it alone, and I've been paying for that for 4 years, and I am going to pay for it for the rest of my life. I want you to know that before you decide anything. I am not a clean man. I am not an easy man. I have done things in service of other men's decisions that I would undo if I could, and I can't, and I carry them." That's who you are standing next to. "Ethan, let me finish." "Ethan Cole, I do not need you to audit yourself to me at 2:30 in the morning in the doorway of your dead mother-in-law's guest room." He turned his head and looked at her. "I was trying to be honest." "I know you were. I'm asking you to be honest with better timing." He looked at her for a second longer, and then, for the first time since she had met him, he smiled. Just a small one. It did not go all the way to his eyes, but it got most of the way. "All right," he said. "All right." She took his hand. In the back bedroom, Maya shifted in her sleep and made a small sound and settled again. In the front room, Samuel Crane set his glass down on the table with a soft, deliberate click. Outside, the wind had died, and the pines were still, and somewhere at the edge of the lake, a loon called once and went quiet. Lila Hart, 25 years old, CEO of a defense company her father had built out of a single hangar in 1971, stood in the doorway of a stranger's guest room with her hand in the hand of a 30-year-old security guard, who was not, and had never been, a security guard. And she thought about the photograph of her as a 22-year-old that her father had kept on his desk. And she thought about the letter her father had never written her. And she thought that maybe her father had not left her any instructions at all. And that maybe what he had left her instead was this man, in this doorway, at this hour, watching his daughter sleep. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He did not move away. For a long time, nobody in the cabin spoke, and the wood stove in the front room ticked and cooled, and the small red pickup truck sat in the gravel with its engine still warm, and in the back bedroom, a 6-year-old girl slept with her fist curled around the corner of a quilt that had been her father's mother's, and none of them knew yet what the next morning was going to ask of them. And for a small window of hours in the middle of a very long night, none of them needed to. The morning came gray and slow over the pines. Maya woke up at a little past 7 and padded barefoot into the front room looking for her father, and she found him at the kitchen table with Samuel Crane and a woman she did not know, and she stood in the doorway with her thumb in her mouth, which she had not done in 2 years, and she looked at Lila for a long, quiet moment before she climbed into her father's lap without a word. Lila reached across and pushed a piece of hair back from the child's forehead, and Maya let her. And that was how it started. The investigation took 11 weeks. Russell Vance turned on the board member before the first Monday was out, which was the kind of thing Vance would do. And the board member turned on outside counsel. And outside counsel turned on 3 vice presidents who had known just enough to be guilty and not enough to be useful. And by the end of March, the wing of Hartwell's corporate tower that had been rotting for 6 years had been cut out cleanly enough that the company's stock actually ticked up 4% the day the indictments were unsealed. Lila gave exactly 1 press conference about it. She wore a black suit, and she did not cry. And she thanked the federal investigators by name, and when a reporter from the Journal asked her if it was true that an unarmed security officer had, quote, single-handedly foiled the kidnapping that broke the case open, she looked at the reporter for a long second, and she said, "He wasn't unarmed. He had principles." Next question. 2 months later, at a shareholders' meeting that the financial press had been speculating about for weeks, Lila Hart stood up in front of 900 men and women in a hotel ballroom in Ashford and announced the creation of a new division inside Hartwell, Security Operations and Veteran Outreach. And she announced its director, and she said his name twice so nobody would mistake it. Ethan Cole stood up from a chair in the third row in a suit that Lila's tailor had cut for him the week before, and he walked up to the microphone, and he said 5 sentences that he had written himself and had not shown to anyone. He said that he had spent most of his adult life being useful to people he could not name in places he could not describe, and that he had spent the last 4 years trying to forget all of it, and that he had been wrong to try. He said that the men and women he had served with had come home to a country that did not always know what to do with them, and that if Hartwell was going to make the tools of war, Hartwell was going to take care of the people who had carried them. He said that this was not charity. He said that it was the bill coming due. Then he sat down, and the room was quiet for about 4 seconds, and then it stood up. The board, privately, thought the whole thing was sentimental. Lila, privately, did not care what the board thought. Her father had built the company out of a hangar and a handshake, and she had decided, sometime in the middle of a cold night in a cabin in Willow Grove, that she was going to run it the way her father would have run it if he had lived long enough to understand what he was actually protecting. The part after, it turned out, was slower than any of them had expected. Ethan did not move into Lila's building. He did not propose to her in a helicopter or in a restaurant or on a beach. He made her pancakes on a Saturday morning about 4 months in, and they were not very good pancakes. He had let the pan get too hot, and the first one came out black on one side. And Maya, sitting at the kitchen table in her pajamas, looked at Lila and said, "Daddy cooks bad when he's nervous." And Lila had laughed so hard she put her forehead down on the table, and Ethan, standing at the stove with a spatula in his hand, had smiled the way a man smiles when he has finally figured out that the thing he was afraid of was, all along, the thing he wanted. They did not rush. Lila learned to braid Maya's hair. She was bad at it for a long time. Maya was patient with her in the way children are patient with adults they have decided to love, which is to say, not patient at all, but willing. Lila bought a small house across town from her penthouse, a house with a yard and a real front porch, and she moved most of her things into it, and she left the penthouse empty for about a year before she finally sold it. The new house had a room for Maya, painted pale yellow because Maya picked the color, with a bookshelf that Ethan built himself one weekend and a reading chair that Lila had reupholstered from one that had been her mother's. Samuel Crane retired for real that spring. He went back to the fishing cabin in Willow Grove, and he came down once a month for Sunday dinner, and he taught Maya to tie 4 different kinds of knots over the course of that summer. And when he died 3 years later in his sleep at the age of 74, Ethan drove up alone to clear out the cabin, and he came back with the rifle, which he put in a locked case in the basement, and with a cardboard box of photographs, one of which was a picture of Vincent Hart and a young man in a uniform standing in front of a diner in Oklahoma in the fall of 2023, and he gave that picture to Lila, and she put it on the mantle next to a picture of her mother, and she did not take it down. They were not perfect. Lila worked too much. Ethan had nights when he didn't sleep, and she would find him at 3 in the morning sitting at the kitchen table with the lights off, and she learned not to ask what he was thinking about, and to just put the kettle on and sit with him until it whistled. He learned not to flinch when she touched the back of his neck from behind. He learned, slower, that a man is allowed to want things. A quieter job, a warmer house, a woman's hand on his in a movie theater without having to pay for the wanting afterward. Maya grew up. She had her father's brown eyes and Lila's way of raising one eyebrow when she was deciding whether to be polite. And she called Lila by her first name for a long time, and then, one afternoon when she was 9, coming home from a school play, she said Mom in the back seat of the car without thinking about it, and Lila, driving, did not say anything because she did not trust her voice. And in the rearview mirror, Ethan closed his eyes for a long second and then opened them, and he reached across the console and put his hand over his wife's hand on the wheel. They got married into the backyard of the house with the pale yellow room. 14 people. Maya held the rings. Mrs. Delgado cried. Samuel, still alive then, gave a toast that was 3 sentences long and made Ethan laugh out loud, which was a sound most of the room had never heard. If there's a thing to take from any of this, it is probably not the shootout in the parking garage, or the drive north in the panel van, or the night in the lot behind the research annex. Those are the parts that make the news. The thing that matters is smaller and quieter and harder to point at. It is that a man who had spent 8 years of his life being used as a weapon had decided, on his own, without being asked, to spend the rest of it being a father. It is that a woman who had been raised to run an empire had looked across a cheap kitchen table at a tired security guard one Sunday morning and understood that the thing her father had really left her was not a company. It is that the people who save us are almost never the ones we expect, and almost always the ones we have been walking past every morning without learning their names. Ethan Cole had spent 18 years trying to be invisible. In the end, he wasn't. He was seen. He was seen by a woman who had been taught her whole life not to need anyone, and she chose him anyway, the way you choose a porch light on a long dark road. Not because it's grand, but because it's on, and it's waiting, and it's enough. And that, in the quiet town across the river from the city where all of it had started, was the life they built. Not smooth, not spotless, not the life either of them had planned, but a life with a yellow bedroom in it and a pair of steel handcuffs locked in a drawer in the basement that nobody ever opened, and a photograph on the mantle of a man and another man in front of a diner, and a small family that sat down to dinner together most nights, and said ordinary things, and passed the salt, and was, in every way that mattered, safe.